to the DeBartolo Performing Arts Center. Before we begin, we ask that you please turn off and stow all phones and electronic or light-emitting devices as these are distracting to others. All unauthorized video and photography is strictly prohibited. For your own safety, please take a moment to locate the nearest exit. Our usher staff is here to assist you in case of an emergency. This year's Notre Dame Forum, Reimagining School to Nurture the Soul of a Nation, is a year-long discussion to explore the profound and challenging questions that shape the national debate about K-12 education, which has a dramatic impact on the future of American civil society. Thank you for joining us. At this time, please welcome to the stage Notre Dame President, Father John Jenkins.
Warmest welcome to everyone. We're here to welcome Governor Jeb Bush to speak to us on K-12 education. It really is a once-in-a-decade event because in 1992, we welcomed President George H. Bush. In 2001, his brother George W. Bush, and now 2011, the third great statesman of the family, Governor Jeb Bush, to talk about such a critical issue for our nation, K-12 education, its reform. And you know, education is what we do at Notre Dame, and so we recognize its power and importance in the life of an individual young man or woman and in the life of this country. So it's critical that we, all of us, attend to this issue, listen to these talks, engage in conversation about how to address this issue. And there's few people, I don't think anyone, who could speak more authoritatively to this issue than our speaker. Since his inauguration as the 43rd president of Florida in 1998, Jeb Bush has distinguished himself as one of the most aggressive and successful elected officials serving education reform on the national scene, advancing a broad array of reform initiatives that has been entitled the Florida Cocktail. Governor Bush and his team have focused on a broad range of educational issues, and the results of his work have earned national acclaim. As several states have begun to implement similar reform efforts, and it's served to catalyze a broader national conversation about the contours of K-12 education. Currently, Governor Bush is president of the consulting firm Jeb Bush and Associates and senior advisors to Berkeley Capital. He sits on the boards of several corporations and serves as the chairman of the Foundation for Excellence in Education and the Foundation of Florida's Future. He also sits on the board of several civic and charitable organizations. He and his wife, Columba, live in Miami and have 3 children. Would you join me in giving the warmest Notre Dame welcome to our speaker, Governor Jeb Bush?
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you very much. It is great to be on this beautiful campus. Thank you so much for coming to hear. This is a Jeb Bush, Al Gore impersonation of trying to do a PowerPoint presentation about education. I haven't done this yet, so bear with me, but it is a joy to be here. This is my 4th or 5th time I've been on this campus. The last time was to participate in another education-related activity a year ago, or a year and a half ago, and the one that I most remember, though, was, I don't know, you're young, you may not remember the Catholics versus convicts game. Well, I'm a University of Miami fan, living in Miami, and that was the game where the Catholics won. It was a beautiful fall day. My son, who ended up going to Rice University, I think he was a junior or maybe a senior, and he said after spending a Saturday afternoon with the leaves changing colors, it was about 50 degrees, it was beautiful. Digger Phelps gave him a tour of the campus. He said, "Dad, I want to go to Notre Dame." And somehow, I don't know, he eventually got excited about Rice, but what a beautiful place. You are so blessed to go to a school as beautiful and as committed to quality education. And my hope and dream for the United States is, in effect, that we create a crisis, that you have competent, motivated, highly qualified young people graduating from high school that could get into this school and many others. Wouldn't that be a crisis that the United States would love to have? Because sadly today, that's not the case. Sadly today, a third of our young people get to their senior year truly ready to be college ready or career ready. A third graduate from high school, but they are having to take remedial courses either at their community college or increasingly so at public universities and some private universities around the country, and a third don't graduate at all. These results that have kind of changed for the worse in increments not discernible to the naked eye now have created a significant challenge for our country. And so I'd like to give you a little bit of a story, the Florida story, that has begun to reverse that trend. And I'm very proud of the work of the Florida legislature in concert with teachers and administrators throughout the state that adapted and changed to this new reality that we created. But first, a little bit about what I found when I was governor of the state. The first thing that I found, actually as a candidate for office, because I proposed what was called the A+ plan for education. I proposed it as a candidate. Anybody here that is aspiring to run for public office, the only advice I'd give you is say what you're going to do. Don't do remember the movie Best Little Whorehouse in Texas, where the guy did a little Texas two-step and kind of bounced back and forth, never said anything, always said something to make people smile and feel good, never said anything of substance. Our country doesn't need that. If you're passionate about whatever it is, the environment or the budget or economic growth or education reform, say what you're going to do. And I did that in 1998 as a candidate, and I'm not sure that's why I won, but it certainly gave me a legitimacy to act on what this proposal was. And what I found when I was a candidate was that there are all sorts of excuses in public education. And the net result is, whether it's education doesn't get enough money, that's the standard first thing. Well, the fact is that over the last 20 years, with the exception of the last 2, there has been dramatic increases in spending for public education. In fact, the United States spends more per student than any country in the world. And so if you start saying that it's just money, that's all we need is more money, then you would hope that with the money that's been invested over a half a generation at a time, you would have seen the kind of results that would make us proud, but in fact it's gone the other way. The second is that life circumstances are different for families, and that's true. There's no denying that. But that is an excuse to have one standard for one group of kids compared to the other. How many times do you hear, well, it's not fair to have an accountability system for kids in poverty compared to kids that live in affluence? And if you raise the bar up for one group at the expense of the other, those kids will end up having lower expectations and, sadly, lower results. It's not fair to have a harder-edged reform and accountability for kids in poverty, and I would argue the exact opposite. I would argue that because we have kids in poverty, it's not their fault. Their life circumstances should not define the level of income that they will have over their lifetime. It should not define who they are. But in fact, the outcomes in education is by far and away the leading indicator of whether you will have a successful life, whether you'll have a life of purpose. And so by using these excuses with good intentions, the public education system across the country, I think, has yielded a bad result, particularly for those whose life circumstances are not as good as others. And then finally, there's an argument all the time that if you have a tough love approach to reform, that you're going to hurt children's self-esteem. Well, this is the one place where we are really good in the United States. We don't have to worry about children's self-esteem. Most kids feel really good about where we stand. In fact, if you look at the international test, the PISA test, which measures 15-year-olds in math and science and reading, we're bumping along kind of in the middle or the back in those indicators. Korea, Shanghai, Singapore, Finland. You got to go way down the list to get to the United States. But they actually asked students where they think they rank. We're number 1 is the way the American kids think. So don't worry about self-esteem. And finally, the net result of these excuses is that we have dismal results. And so one would think that that might yield a passion to try to change things. The damage of low expectations, these numbers are there for people to see. There's a direct link to higher outcomes. With higher education outcomes yield higher incomes, yield more intact families, yield the kind of results that a loving, compassionate society you would want to have in a society. Lower education outcomes have the pathologies then that create demands on government and create shattered lives. Every one of those numbers is a person that otherwise, had they gotten a quality education, would have had a fighting chance to live a life of purpose and a life of dignity. So, what did we try to do in Florida? We tried to change this culture of excuses and of pessimism about whether children can learn, to turn it upside down on its head, to move to a different way. So we created a philosophy of high expectations for every child. No excuses, irrespective of whether Juanito acaba de venir de Bolivia, or whether John, who lived in Liberty City in the toughest part of Miami, it didn't matter. Every child that was going to public schools would be held to the same loftier expectation. Secondly, we created higher standards, because one of the lessons I think we've learned over time is that if you raise the bar, perhaps not as so high up as to make it impossible for children to succeed, but if you have higher expectations, everybody aligns their efforts to try to achieve those expectations, and that experience we found in Florida as well. And then we created accountability for schools. I know this will sound radical, but in 1996, the state of Florida created a system of measuring schools that was Roman numeral 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And I was pretty knowledgeable about what was going on in Florida. For the life of me, I can't tell you if 5 was good or 5 was the bottom, or 1 was good or 1 was the bottom. No one in Florida knew. So we changed it to A, B, C, D, and F. Schools were graded the way students are graded, 100% based on student learning, half on how they did to the standards, half on how they did to learning gains, with an extra emphasis on the bottom 25% of every school. And it created an accountability system, and we rewarded improvement and excellence with an extra $100 per student. And at the beginning of this program, if schools were graded F for 2 years out of 4, first, if they're graded F, they'd get more help for remediation. But if they had an F again, which was a designation of more chronic types of failure, parents would be empowered to send their kids to either a better performing public school or to a private school. That kind of accountability created a renaissance in improvement, particularly with the lowest performing schools and the lowest performing students. And as an additional pressure, if you will, of additional consequence, we expanded school choice in our state to the greatest number of options for parents, and that continues on to this day. The net result is that we had rising student achievement. So rather than excusing, we tried to create a harder edge reform that yielded the results that now people look at and wonder why it is that Florida has lowered the achievement gap, one of 2 states or 3 states in the last 10 years, and had learning gains that have taken us from the bottom of the pack to above the national average. And this is the lesson that I've learned, that if you're passionate about something, and this doesn't relate just to education, if you're in public life and you have a chance to make a difference, don't be like the guy in the Geico ad, the marine psychologist that talks about mamby-pamby land to the guy. Don't go to mamby-pamby land. Have hard-edged consequences for your reforms. Communicate them in a way that shows that you're on the side of improvement, or you're on the side of people you're trying to help. Engage completely with high voltage energy, but don't pull back. Don't compromise to the point where it's meaningless. You might as well not be having influence if you make a compromise and you consider yourself successful in politics or whatever endeavor you're in. Go for it. And that's exactly what we did. And that drawing a line in the sand to say that we have no tolerance for failure and mediocrity and that we want to celebrate improvement and success created a whole environment that yielded better results. So I mentioned the fuzzy descriptors of 1 through 5. We went through A through F. That began to change the effort. The other thing that we did is we tried to reward rigor everywhere we went. So we had great data. We collected all this nerdy data to be able to identify, for example, in our D&F schools, kids weren't taking the practice SAT. I don't know if you use the practice the SAT here or the ACT or both, but in Florida it's an SAT school. 10% of the DNF school students were taking the practice SAT in 10th grade. You go to an A and B school, 85 to 90% were taking it. So the state paid for all of the SAT, the practice SAT, so there was no excuse for all the kids to be able to participate. We created the first College Board partnership, put $12 million into it to expand AP classes in the rural areas and the urban core areas, and generated significant improvement in places that otherwise would have never seen an AP teacher of any kind. And so this embrace of rigor along with creating accountability created some pretty significant results. One of the things that now enough research has come out over the last 10 years, Florida was the first state to create a statewide voucher program. There's a lot of research that has been done that, contrary to the political argument that somehow vouchers are bad for public education, vouchers create pressure on the public education system, and public schools have improved in Florida because there are public and private choices for students. I don't know why that is counterintuitive for so many people, but it really works. It's really true that if you give people choices, not all the time will they take that choice, but they will. It definitely improves the public schools where the threat of leaving creates a sense of urgency. So in Florida, we have 150,000 students in 459 charter schools, which is the second highest in the country. And this next year, that number will double by 2012. We have 21,000 students that are students with disabilities of different kinds that, because their parent unilaterally says they're not receiving the education that they deserve under the federal law, go to private schools. We have 33,000 students in our corporate tax scholarship program. These are low-income students. There's a waiting list now of about 30,000 more, but over time, as slots become available, that program will probably double in the next 5 years. Last year, we had 152,000 four-year-olds because we have a universal pre-K program that 85% of the students go to private schools. We have voucher programs that create the chance to empower people that otherwise wouldn't have it, and along the way, public education has improved. And the one area of school choice that Florida definitely leads the nation in is in digital learning. This year, 150,000 students will be taking 300,000 courses virtually through the Florida Virtual School, which is a form of choice that's not necessarily for every credit. These are online courses or taken in a hybrid format in existing public schools, but it does create an additional option for parents, and they are dramatically increasing where they stand. So the net result of this cocktail of reforms is this is the NAEP scores, the National Academic Education Progress Test. It's called the Nation's Report Card. It is administered for 4th and 8th graders. I'm showing you the better results, just to be honest with you. The 8th grade results we were at the bottom of the pack as well. We're at the national average. This, though, shows that in 1998, we were 29th out of 31 states that administered the NAEP test in 4th grade reading. Not me, but others would whisper, thank God for Mississippi and Louisiana. And we went, 10 points is a full grade level improvement. And so over the next 10 years, we went up 2 grade levels in reading aptitude, and we now are above the national average. We're now 6th out of 50 states. So 29th out of 31 to 6th out of 50. It didn't happen by osmosis or the summer solstice immediately, consuming Florida to get these grades. This happened because there was an intense effort to change public education for the better, and we funded our reforms to the degree that made the reforms easier to swallow, perhaps. And so this is a chart that takes the NAEP scores for 4th grade reading and compares if Florida Hispanic students were a state, where would they rank amongst the 50 states? And you can see that Florida's Hispanic students would rank equal to Indiana's average and equal to or better than 31 states in the United States. Florida's low-income Hispanic students do better than the California average. And if you take African-American kids, Remember the excuses that some kids can learn and some kids can't. It's not fair to have one lofty expectation for one group at the expense of others. Typically, this is geared towards African American kids. This is what my brother called the soft bigotry of low expectations. In Florida, we reverse that, and today, Florida African American kids have had tremendous gains, and they are better than 6 or 7 states. And my guess is that when the next NAEP test is administered, you'll find that African American kids in Florida will continue to show progress. African American kids in Florida do better than any of the other disaggregated African American groups in any other state. If you look at the reforms, another lesson learned would be you got to be in this over the long haul. So these are progressive improvements, or the lack thereof, in middle school. Middle school is a tough place for reform to take hold. You may recall vividly what it was like to be in middle school. 8th graders are like my height. 6th graders are like down to here. You know, hormones rage, both boys and girls. People are distracted a lot in middle school. They're typically way too big, I think, and the coursework is not rigorous, so it's a real challenge. But what we saw was we eliminated social promotion in 3rd grade. And once the kids that went through that process reached middle school, you began to see improvement that otherwise did not exist. So we saw level 1 is below basic, functionally illiterate. The numbers dropped dramatically for middle school, and we've seen appreciable gains each and every year in our middle school learning. So what are referred to as the Bush babies, that were the first kids that went through these reforms in elementary school, began to see progress in middle school over the 3 or 4 year period as they entered middle school. And then you can see our graduation rate, which was bumping at the bottom. This one, I think you would say, thank God for Puerto Rico, maybe, I don't know. I think we were 50th out of 51 states in 1998. But you can see that every subgroup has seen improvement, and our numbers have grown significantly each and every year, with the exception of one group. In 1 year, it went from 55 to 54. Other than that, there has been significant gains. And the expectation is, as these children acquire the basic abilities to read and write and calculate math, they will also graduate from high school. One of the things that I mentioned, the AP exams, this is the end result of a sustained effort to provide higher quality courses for kids that otherwise would not receive them. And so we focused particularly in the urban core and rural areas where no one had seen an AP course for a generation of time. And you can see the number of test takers, which was a significant increase. And this is the passing scores, where you have a 249% increase, which leads the nation. And if you break it out by subgroups, the numbers are even higher for Hispanics and African American kids. So the result of all this is this crisis that I think is what we should aspire to have college and career-ready young people that are graduating from high school on time and capable of taking higher coursework, whether it's in a technical school or community college or a university. This is the result in Florida. It's been a long struggle, but we were 50% of students in the 1990s were qualified to take on post-secondary work, and today that number has gained appreciably. And my expectation is that as long as there is a command focus on reform continuing, which it appears to be in Florida, that we'll see that number continue to rise. These are results that are now being emulated by others that around the country, because they're kind of irrefutable. I mean, this is not an opinion, these are facts, and because of that, people begin to see these results. And so there's 15 to 20 states that are taking versions of what we did and now beginning to apply them. The biggest and most important one is right here in Indiana, where Governor Daniels has passed a very provocative suite of reforms that I guarantee you will improve public education in this state. And so the lessons that I would say is, be selfless, equally important. There's a guy, the governor of Michigan, Rick Snyder, talks about the need to have relentless positive energy. That everything he does is don't cast aspersions, don't blame others. Imagine a politician not blaming somebody else. That would be hard to imagine in 2011, but that's what he does. Be positive. to create kind of a culture of you can do it rather than, oh, woe is me, we can't do it, and be relentless. And I would say the selflessness needs to be tethered down by dogged determination. And the other is when you have a chance, be big rather than small. Don't play small ball when you have a chance to lead people through substantive change. Be bold rather than painting in pastel colors. Go for it because you get one chance at this, and then once you see success, repeat it. Don't stop, because you can create a climate of sustainable reform if you stick with it over the long haul. And this is kind of what we learned in Florida. Once you set the bar for reform, in this case, accountability and choice, it's like a big rock. You throw a big, huge boulder into a pond, and the ripples are much bigger than if you throw a pebble. And so it created many other opportunities to do a lot of different things. So school districts today in Florida, rather than talking about bus routes and the really nasty food that's most of the time given to students in cafeterias, they talk about the strategies on how all of their schools can be A schools. They first talked about getting rid of any F school in their district. Now they're talking about being the first district out of the 67 in our state that would be A-rated all across the board. And so it creates kind of a momentum effect for leadership. It also created, in our case, the chance for many other people to be involved. I asked someone how many mentors were in our public schools, because one of the real challenges we faced was we had third graders. Roughly a third of third graders in 2000 in Florida were below basic readers, were functionally illiterate. I know you don't remember what it was like in fourth grade, but in fourth grade is when you begin to acquire knowledge, when you take social studies, when you learn science. And if you can't read, there ain't no way that you're going to be able to master that fourth grade work. And so we said we're not going to allow a child to be functionally illiterate unless there is a good faith exemption, and those were narrowly prescribed. They would not go to fourth grade. And so at the time we announced this, 31%, I think, of our third graders were in this category of functional illiteracy. And it was my re-election. So all my political advisors, whatever number I had, they were freaking out. So you got to be crazy to do this. Think of all the moms that are going to be just going nuts when little Susie's held back because they didn't pass a test. In effect, that was the argument, and it was probably a legitimate argument, but thank goodness, this is why I do believe that there is a God. We had significant improvements to the point where now that number has been cut in half. And so in order to achieve that, though, we just didn't rely on a test and just hope that teachers did their job. We also asked the communities where these students were to embrace this effort as well. So we measured how many mentors we had in our schools. We asked all the organizations to redirect to third grade to make sure that struggling readers would get the extra attention that came from a loving person who would commit to 1 hour a week inside the classroom. We created 4 hours off for every government worker to be able to work with pay as long as they went to mentor a child 4 hours a month. We got businesses to do the same. We created a Teen Trendsetters program for 11th grade student leaders to be able to do the exact same thing all across the state in the lower performing elementary schools where struggling readers took place. And the point is, because we threw the big boulder in, it created a ripple effect for all sorts of other reforms, and it helped in many ways to create this improvement. It was clear that teachers, do you all have an education school here? Good. So I can say what I really think about education schools. Teachers don't know how to teach reading. How could you not? That would seem like if you had to pick the one thing that you would expect teachers to really embrace is the solid research about how you create a broad-based, literacy-based effort to teach reading. And so we created reading coaches in every elementary school to teach teachers how to teach reading. And it was liberating for teachers that were finally given this kind of instruction and the development tools to be able to do it. So we tried to hit it on every cylinder, and it was the reason, all of these efforts, not just one, was the reason why we had success. And so The same applied, as I mentioned, to this social promotion policy. And one of the other issues that came about was it was clear you can't wait till the last part of the third grade. If you're ending social promotion, you're basically rolling the dice for a child's future. And so what we found was that we had teachers, in kindergarten and first grade and second grade developing strategies with the third grade teachers to focus on literacy-based efforts to make sure that children read, and we included our pre-K efforts, which were underway at the time with the pre-K voucher. So I guess the lesson of policymaking would be that success is never final and reform is never complete. That if you're serious about this, the minute you stop pushing the ball up the hill and grinding it out against a lot of opposition is the first day of your demise. That the lesson that I at least have found in Florida's education story is that you got to constantly be building on the success of reform that you had. And so I would say Reform 2.0 in the case of Florida is now underway. And one of the main elements that we've done is something similar that took place here in Indiana as well as Illinois and a few other states, which is to try to modernize the teaching profession, to move it away from a union-driven collective bargaining process that is focused on the economic interests of teachers. Don't get me wrong, that's what unions are for. In fact, Al Shanker, the great union leader, said once that when kids start paying union dues, I'll start focusing on them. And that's the result. That's what unions do. They're focused on the economic interests of students. But if you had a profession where you rewarded student achievement as an important element of measuring how teachers did, my guess is that you would get more student learning. So Florida is embarking on this experiment. The elimination of tenure took place for all new teachers. There's now an assessment process that requires 50% of the assessment to be based on standardized tests, end-of-course exams, or the state test. The rest of the measurement would be based on principal evaluations and peer evaluations and parent evaluations. And so the move, we pay higher for the underserved areas of math and science. There'd be a focus on in the underserved areas paying more as well. And so this is one of the areas where the next iteration of reform is taking place. And the one I'm most passionate about is digital learning, where I believe it's impossible to imagine us benchmarking ourselves to the world, which we need to do. A great nation should not say, we're 15, woohoo, we're number 26, wow, we're great. We should say, we aspire to be the best, because we know that these results really matter. For people to be able to get high-wage jobs, there has to be a direct link to education outcomes. And so if we're aspirational, then we should embrace digital learning, because it's impossible to imagine in a classroom of 25 kids learning different ways at different levels, to place a teacher there and to think that that teacher, first of all, has mastered all of the higher quality content, which is not necessarily the case because they haven't gotten the training. And secondly, then to teach to every child exactly the way they need to be taught to achieve the kind of results we want, it's not going to work. But it can work in a blended learning environment where content is brought in from the internet, rich content that is benchmarked to the world, where teachers then become the coaches of students. And students then can learn, actually are held accountable for their own learning. They're empowered and take responsibility for their learning. But it also gives them the chance to learn at their own pace, and if they have remedial problems, the teacher can exercise the prerogative to take care of that child. But we're not holding back kids who could learn this stuff a lot quicker. Most of the people in this room, most of the students at Notre Dame would fit that category. And we're not letting kids lag so far behind that they get so discouraged that they drop out. Digital learning is, I think, one of the next iterations of reform. So here's where this great institution, I think, can play a role. First, I believe that online learning, the brand of Notre Dame is world-class. The community here is one that, thousands of kids want to come here. Not a select number get to make it. But why not take this incredible brand that's based on my religion and the religion of many people, I'm sure, in this room, but also based on excellence and values that are really important for our success, why not take that brand and take it to places that otherwise would not experience it? Why not take it to Latin America, Father, where we have, aspiring people that would love to get online credits of high quality that would not diminish the quality of what goes on this campus? Why not take it to every Catholic high school to offer it as a dual enrollment credit, which is not done right now in Notre Dame? Why not? Why would you not want to share this incredible experience to people and give people a chance to dream bigger dreams? If Notre Dame did that and subsidized it or made it another source of revenue to be able to make your tuition lower, that strategy would be developed by your great leadership. That was not pandering, by the way. You would find that there would be lots of moms and dads that would keep their kids in Catholic education all the way to the end because they would be getting a college credit from Notre Dame University along with that high school credit. This is being done today in America all across the country, but it's not being done at the caliber and quality with the brand recognition of Notre Dame. So that's my first suggestion. My second is that this university, I think, through its institute, could play a huge role in training the next generation of teachers and existing teachers on how to make digital learning not the exception, but the norm. Because 10 years from now, this will be the norm. A hybrid format or direct digital learning will be more commonplace than the classroom that looked like 1925, where kids sit in seats in front of a blackboard or even a whiteboard with a teacher teaching to the median child, and they're there for 180 days, whether they like it or not, whether they've learned or whether they've already acquired that knowledge. They sit there until the bell goes off on the last day of school. Digital learning will change all of that. And it would be a great university, I think, could play a huge role in accelerating that because the teachers will have to change how they go about doing this business. I hope I'm not offending any important people in this room with these suggestions, by the way. This is a place where I think Notre Dame does a spectacular job, which is to encourage the leadership that's developed at this university to play a role wherever you land in your own communities, to demand higher quality education, because you will have children and you will want them to be in places where the aspirations are far higher than they are today. For our country to be great, we need leadership outside of the political realm to demand change. And I think Notre Dame plays that role in the broad sense, but it would be wonderful to see it specifically focus on academic achievement for the next generation of Americans, led by Notre Dame graduates. And then the final big idea for Notre Dame is to beat USC. So that kind of describes the Florida story. I'm very proud of the work of a lot of people. You may see the tire marks on my forehead. I guess I'll conclude with this. This was hard work politically because, I was at a meeting and the Orlando Sentinel had a conference about education reform a week ago, and it was like deja vu all over again. I don't do many events in Florida because it's kind of liberating not to have people scowl at you. The first group of people, the teachers that came up to me, they had that look. I don't know if you've, basically, I hate your guts. That's kind of the look. And so I'm smiling because I know they're coming at me to, oh, it's not fair. It's not fair. My kids, does blah, 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 over and over again. This is 2011. It's like going back in time to 1999 to go through the exact same conversations again. So this is a long-term fight. And there are people that resist change. A lot of people like the system the way it is because the economic interests of adults are taken care of better in a system where there are a bunch of monopolies where, the school districts negotiate for the economic rights between teachers, and they find creative ways to keep others out of the system, and they don't feel some sense of urgency about changing education outcomes for students. I guess at the end of this, what I believe that Florida is on the path to do, is certainly not there yet, is to get to a place that is much more student-centered. where there's less tolerance for mediocrity, and where the God-given ability of students are achieved in a way that allows them to be successful going forward. I hope you get involved in this long-term struggle because it's really important for our country. Thank you all very much. Mike's. So, I am happy to answer questions. The microphones are way up here. I was told to please walk to the microphone. For some reason, the sound in this place is spectacular from here, but maybe it's not so good in the seats. Yes?
Hi, my name's Kevin. I'm a senior American Studies major here.
Where are you from, Kevin?
Phoenix. Yeah, so not Florida, though. But I read a couple articles about the Florida formula, and like all the critics seem to say that it would be a success if students graduated at 4th grade, but there is data that like the students in Florida, as they move on, they perform at a similar level or at a smaller level than, lower level than students nationwide. So I was wondering why. Well, yeah, there's that. But but even when you put up that slide about the describing the end to social promotion and demanding that 3rd graders all know how to read, it seems that high standard isn't carried through to high school seniors. It's like the requirement for that was that they show basic competency in math and reading. So
so the high school graduation requirement, which some states don't have. Some states don't have any graduation other than breathing, inhaling oxygen, exhaling CO2, and making it that 180th day or near close enough your senior year. We have a 10th grade level graduation test, which needs to be raised. No question about it. In fact, I think what's going to happen, Florida's leading the way along with Indiana and a few other states for these things called Common Core standards. Have you followed this? These are standards that are benchmarked to the world's best standards, and there are fewer of them, they're deeper, they're more transparent, and they're harder, but they're focused on the things that students really need to learn to know. And they will be, if you achieve them, you're at 12th grade level benchmark to the world. So that's where we're going next. Okay. But we've seen improvement. This is the first question that folks that I do these deals in like legislatures and stuff, and the unions typically, this is really, I know that you didn't get it from this, but the first question that comes is this question, well, okay, we'll give you a break on the 4th grade. You did really great in elementary school, but you suck on high school. And maybe they didn't use those words, and I apologize, but those are the results. And so, we got a long way to go, but there's been pretty good improvement.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Yes, thank you. Hi. Can you say who you are and where you're from?
Yeah, I'm Lauren Rash, and I'm from Dallas, Texas. And I'm wondering. I'm wondering, with an increased emphasis on digital learning, what the landscape will look like for teachers.
Well, it's work in progress. So I think my personal belief is that a great majority of young people will go to school, not, like stay in their closet and pull out their iPad and take down their information, take the course, and never connect with anybody. We don't need that as a society, and frankly, that's not feasible for the great majority of students. Although virtual learning right now is used a lot for home school or home-based students by choice, and also for kids that may have sicknesses that make it impossible for schools. But my guess is it'll be a blended learning format. So the teaching profession, you would imagine it, and it's already in existence in great schools across the country, but there are a couple of schools in California and Arizona that kind of lead the way in this regard, where the teacher is a manager of the learning experience and where students have to accept responsibility. So I'll give you an example of how this works, and one of the ways I got really excited about this was I went to Stockholm. Stockholm is, for some really strange reason, Stockholm has a totally private voucher system, universal voucher system. Surprised me, since my vision of Stockholm was it was kind of like socialist nirvana. There must have been a period in the early 90s where the conservatives got in power and they did this, because it just doesn't make sense to me. But so they have, if you're a parent, you can send your child to any school, public or private, and the dollars follow the child. And there's a school, a string of schools called knowledge schools, run by a guy named Peje Emilsson, and I went to see one of those schools. 60% of this was a middle school. 60% of the kids were immigrants. In the case of Sweden, these aren't Norwegians and Finns. These are Somalians, Ethiopians, Iraqis, by and large. They're newly arrived in varying degrees, similar to what we have here. And these kids are learning at their own pace. There are 32 modules per course. The teachers are coaches, in effect. It's chaotic looking, but it worked really well. One of the reasons why it works well is the students have to accept more responsibility for their own learning, which I think is actually a pretty good idea. That we should have that as part of the learning experience, to accept responsibility for the work you have. It would make a better worker if you learn that early. And so the teachers help the kids that are struggling with remediation. Students help the kids that are struggling with remediation. They learn in teams, they learn separately, but they learn their own way. It's mostly technology-based, and they learn at their own pace, and they learn far higher levels of aptitude, or things that are really relevant. So I'm sitting at this table with this kid from Ethiopia. He's got an afro like about this. He's 6'4" already in middle school. With the afro, he's like, Julius Erving, if anybody remembers him. He was a beautiful young man. He was wearing a Che Guevara t-shirt, which that's another story. But he asked me, he said, well, what would you do? I said, what do you mean? Well, I have to decide for next year what my third foreign language is going to be. We have to take Swedish and English, it's mandatory. And I'm thinking Mandarin or French. And I said, why not Spanish? What the heck? Be the fluent, trilingual Spanish speaker in Stockholm. It might work out really well for you. But that's the level of aptitude that can be brought into this classroom. There's high expectations. These are schools where kids achieve far higher because they're asked to achieve far more, and they're held responsible. So the teacher in that case is kind of how I envision this working in most places around the country, which is enabling the learning experience. Not being, we ask teachers to be, if they're a math course, we're expecting them to, be a Nobel Prize laureate or be the greatest teacher, excitingly, showing us how math is important in our lives. Well, not every teacher is capable of doing that. But the content brought in, I guarantee you can bring it in as we see each and every day in our lives. Plus students, the final thing I'd say about digital learning is it may not be so easy for adults my age, but for your age and younger to ignore it, to kind of leave it aside when it's such an integral part of everyday life seems foolish to me. So did I answer the...
Yes, you did. Thank you.
Hi, how are you?
I'm great.
My name is Phil Gonzalez. I'm from Lakeland, Florida.
There you go. Where'd you go to high school?
I was at the International Baccalaureate program at Bartow High School.
Like the second best graded high school in the state. No wonder you're at Notre Dame.
Thank you. I know you talked a little bit about increasing school accountability and about changing the teaching profession. I was wondering if you might be willing to talk a little bit more specifically about how you address certain resistance to your reforms in terms of changing the teaching profession.
Well, this is a place where everybody hopes, when that question's asked, that I have some kumbaya moment, where Jeb found his softer self and convinced the head of the teachers union to, have a man hug, and off we went holding hands into the sunset, partners in education reform. And as much as I would wake up dreaming that and then go back to the reality of the fact that they didn't really like what we did. So with civility, without the rancor that exists today, like in Washington, which is really kind of reaching levels that turn so many people off. We went to war over ideas, and they fought hard. In fact, the union supported my opponent in my re-election. They mortgaged their building to provide support to assure that he won the primary, and then, you know, to fuel his campaign against me, and they lost. So it was, they had to sell the building to you know, pay the mortgage off. This was during the downturn in the real estate economy, I guess. So we weren't buddies. That's all I can say. So we tried to create coalitions around elements of these ideas. There were a lot of people that believed in school choice, and they may not have cared about what reforming public education. So we created coalitions for parents that wanted their kids to go to a Catholic school because they were devout Catholics. There were folks, teachers that really didn't like the politicization of the classroom, and they felt like we could, by doing this, that you could reward teachers for excellence, and they weren't fearful of the kind of changes in that system. So depending on the issue, we would find coalitions of the willing. But there was real opposition. It wasn't you know, lovey-dovey the whole time. Still isn't. I mean, as I said, I saw these folks that probably were angry when my first day I was governor last week, and they had that same look. So they hadn't gotten over it yet. I've been gone 5 years. You'd think they'd lighten up a bit, but they haven't. So I have, on the other hand. Yes.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Liz Chatton. I'm from Indianapolis. And I'm wondering, so digital learning could be thought of as something that is equalizing because any student in any house can get the same kind of education from Notre Dame, no matter where you live. But what role do you see digital learning playing for the student who lives in rural Appalachia who doesn't have internet access, or the poor family who can't afford a laptop?
Well, that's a shrinking population, thankfully. It is shrinking very rapidly, which is quite helpful. And I would rather spend the money necessary to connect all of America and stop spending huge sums of money on textbooks. We spend hundreds of millions of dollars on big, fat textbooks that don't have the same rich content and can't be, you know, clicked on a link to go to a further, you know, to a further source if you're interested in that subject, and don't have the adaptive nature that digital learning could have, where you, just like, you know, I'll simplify this, you know, a video game uses adaptive technology. You get past the first level, you go to the second. If you can't get past the first level, it might give you a hint on how to get there. That same technology can be combined with rich content so that, and you can spend money on, you know, increasing the access to education. But having said that, the rural schools, most of them already are online. I mean, most of them are connected. So this would not be that large of a challenge. And as students themselves and families become increasingly wired, I think we're probably around 90%, if not higher, particularly with cell phones. I mean, there's ways to connect now that never existed just 5 years ago. So this is, every bigger idea has a challenge attached to it. You've picked the one place I think the challenge is the greatest. But having said that, if in that same rural school, some kid wakes up and says, I want to, you know, why am I not fluent in Mandarin? I'm reading about China, and China's growing at 8% per year, and where I live in West Virginia, we're going backwards at 2% per year. And I want to be successful in life, but I have to learn Mandarin, and there's not a Mandarin teacher within 150 miles of that school. So how else are you going to be able to equalize the learning experience for young people? And that's, so, you know, to a certain extent, the question could be posed the other way around, right? I mean, this is a great equalizer for students. There are Mandarin courses in Indianapolis, maybe, and in Miami, but not in Sopchoppy or in rural Indiana. Yes. Thanks.
Hi, my name is Jackie Covarrubias, and I was just wondering, you had mentioned for like changing the teaching profession, you had said that teachers should be paid based off of student learning. And I was just wondering, how would you measure student learning for that?
Well, the way states are doing this now, because many states, or few, not many, I'd say 10 states are applying versions of this. Colorado, Indiana, Florida, Illinois passed something that did this. There are a lot of different ways, but in the case of Florida, it will be done through end-of-course exams. So you take a history course, you'll have an end-of-course exams, a test that will measure how you did to the standards that are set up by educators, and we'll move to these Common Core standards, which will be mostly now. I mean, most of the country will have different strategies, but the focus on these higher standards will be applied. So end-of-course exams would be the principal way, and the other half of the assessment would be, in the case of Florida, will be based on teacher evaluations that are the more traditional means. So, and the thought here is not to be punitive, it's to reward learning gains, to reward student improvement. And if you're a chronic, failing teacher, because, I mean, there are teachers in Indiana today, and there are teachers in Florida where not just a majority, but 100% or 95% of all the students show no learning gains at all. Now, at what point do we say, enough of this nonsense? At what point do we say, this isn't cutting it? Because if you get kids lag behind far enough, you end up with gaps that are hard to overcome. So the assessment efforts also provide a chance for teachers to get remediation for themselves. And that would be the first step. But if this is a chronic problem, then teachers need to find another profession. And that's what states are now moving towards. It's not going to be a perfect system, but today, I gave out the number 32%, I believe, of Florida third graders were in 2001 or 2002 were below basic, functionally illiterate readers, 32%, but the number of kids that were held back was 1%. Now, that's the system we have today. We just pass kids along. Teachers are, they get their cost of living, they get their bump because they got another year of service. It's based on showing up. That system is not the one that I think will yield the fastest kinds of results. So other states have begun this process of changing it as well. Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Hello, Governor Bush. My name is Austin Hagwood. I'm a freshman here from Northern California. I come from a small public high school, and my mom is an English teacher there. Mm-hmm. And you referred, in regard to online learning or digital learning, to teachers becoming managers or coaches. And I feel that as a student, some of the most impactful experiences I've had in terms of education have come from a teacher who's absolutely passionate about what they're teaching, who is phenomenal in the classroom, and who's a dynamic educator. And I'm wondering how you feel online learning can really encompass the heart, the quality and the soul, if you will, of education, whether that be an English teacher describing a beautiful passage of literature, or a biology teacher in the field, or hands-on with a lab.
Great question. And this would, first of all, I do not believe that digital learning will replace the entire education system. Let me be clear. I'm passionate about it. I might be giving that impression. That's not what I believe. And so, but I do think it's going to grow dramatically to improve, and it will improve quality content. But it's not to replace the passionate, loving teacher that inspires us. We all have a handful, or mine was Don Angel Rubio, who taught me that I could read the great works in Spanish. Never in my wildest dreams could I imagine I did that, and I could do that, but he demanded I do it, basically. He willed it, and then I figured out I could do it, and then I married a Mexican girl because I did it, and I've been married 36 years, and so this teacher is really cool in my life. And so I agree with you. Your mom is probably like that, but this is a tool for teachers. They're not going to stop being great teachers. They'll just have a tool that will allow them to expand that reach. And I think in many places where the offering is narrow because of resources or because of scale, I mean, there's a lot of places. What town are you from?
It's It's about 3 hours north of Sacramento. It has 5,000 residents.
What's it called? I've probably been there. That's why I'm...
Quincy?
Haven't.
Yeah.
You know, Quincy has got great teachers, but it doesn't have the depth of, you know, the science department is, you know, 2 people, right? I mean, so the digital learning provides a way to expand the reach of great teachers. And I think it's going to happen. I just think it's happened in every other element of our life. Why would we not expect it to be more prevalent going forward? Yes, sir.
Hello, Governor. My name's Jeff Gerlomis. I'm from Napa, California. My
Just
mother also works at my high school, so...
Next to Quincy?
Well,
not that far.
I've never been to Quincy either, so I won't judge. My question is similar, but it's geared more toward the role of students' interactions with each other in the school system. Obviously, you said the digital learning isn't going to replace schools, but schools as institutions have become socially and culturally so much more than just academic places. What's the consideration given in the reform of education to the role of students as a group? What do they contribute to each other?
I don't sense the community nature of a school because it's an important element of social development. It's not like probably could do better. I'm not an expert on social development in high schools in America. I can only look at anecdotes, and I'm not sure we're achieving all that we can achieve in that regard either, but it's not going away because of that. I mean, the practicality of people working by itself is a good enough reason, but that doesn't mean we have to have a homogenized experience. So I don't know, have you all heard about the Cristo Rey high schools? Anybody? These are schools for, these are private Catholic schools for low-income kids predominantly who work a day or a day and a half a week, and they in effect pay the tuition because they go to employers who take 2 or 3 kids to get a kind of a full-time equivalent student, and they pay the money to allow this student to get a high-quality private school education, and they're working a day a week. And so they're learning the virtue of work, which is a virtue, and they're also getting the caliber education that their parents want, and the graduation rate from high school is extraordinary, and they're now old enough where they can start measuring completion rates in college. That is one way that you could teach in a public school setting. It might be easier if you harness digital learning to make that a reality. That wouldn't be the only way that I would suggest. I'm not saying replace the homogenized thing we have now, which is quite similar all around the country to one thing. I would say let 1,000 flowers bloom and see what works. Have an assessment that is rigorous and intellectually honest, and let people do the best they think they can do in the format they think it would work, and use these tools that right now are not allowed. I mean, this is why policy matters. You can't do digital learning in many places in the United States because the teacher that provides the learning has to be certified. Certified means you have to gone to a school of education where you didn't learn how to teach reading. You know, these are the old ways, literally the 1920s, many of these ideas were created, and they've been protected because we tolerate monopolies whose organizing principles in many ways politically is to protect the status quo. And so, you know, again, I'm a little crazy about this, and I don't want to overstate it, but I do think it's important. And the places that are applying it today, there's huge acceptance. People are very excited about it.
Thank you, Governor.
Yeah.
Hi, Governor. Name's Luke Lennon. I'm a senior from Indianapolis, Indiana. You mentioned sort of people would harp on the psychological effects of the self-esteem of students with accountability, and you brought up the International Math and Science Test, in which we're 24th, 25th, but you did mention we're #1 in terms of confidence. Do you see that as a good sign, or more that the United States is #1 in the world in terms of we have this like least grasp of what it means to learn?
I don't think it's a good thing.
Okay.
I'd rather have self-esteem based on being #1 rather than 23. So I'd rather have my feelings about how I am match where I actually am.
Right.
That
so
gap is a little scary.
If I'm a student filling out that box at the end of the test, whether I think I've mastered the material or not, don't you think there's something ingrained into this system of accountability where if I've been taking standardized tests since the 3rd grade, which I don't even know if I knew Santa Claus was not real at that point, that maybe that there's something within that system that's going to make me want to click that yes box because I know how important it is to me and my teacher doing well?
Well, that would be a foolhardy thing to do, to say, I think I did well, because they're actually going to grade you. And if you didn't do well, it's totally irrelevant how you feel. I just think our feelings should be secondary to our results. Feeling good isn't going to cut it in a world. I'll conclude with this story. This is the story that I think puts this in perspective. In 1950, Korea was the poorest country in the world. Ravaged 52, 50, whenever the Korean War ended. It was the per capita income lowest in the world. Had no natural resources, had just had an incredible war between North and South. It was a divided country. South Korea was equally as poor as North Korea. In a generation of time, a generation and a half time, Korea has become a first world country. Its income, its median income is first world. Its growth, economic growth, is first world. It has reserves that are higher than the United States reserves because they're a saving country, not a debt to the gourds kind of country like the United States. Its businesses that are the larger businesses are globally competitive. In a generation and a half, it happened, and it didn't happen because they had oil. It didn't happen because they uniquely have bigger brains. It happened because they made education a command-focused commitment. Moms and dads, political leaders, everybody in the country made it that way. And you can see in these PISA scores how Korea has gone from not even being measured to now being number 1 in reading, number 3 and 4, I think, in the science. That's what happens if you make a command-focused commitment, not to feeling good, but to actually raising the bar up. So President Obama, this is the end of the story, President Obama asked the president of Korea on their last visit, what's the biggest challenge you face in education? And the president said, the biggest problem I have are parents. They want English to be taught in 1st grade and not in 2nd grade. That's what I want. I want higher expectations. I want demanding higher quality for all kids for us to be successful. I want the United States, strangely enough, and by the way, they applied all of these things from us. They took the values that created our greatness and applied them there, and we need to reapply them here, whether it's importing them from Korea or just recreating them here. We need to do that for education. Thank you all very much.
Thanks, Kevin.
Thank you.
I'm sorry to have to cut this off. The governor has to go, but I just want to thank him for this great presentation. And I think he said something that I think should be a theme for this whole year. And that is that each of the numbers on that graph, with that too, each of the numbers on that graph are children. And when that line goes down, that's broken lives. And when that line goes up, it's hopeful lives. So, Governor, thanks for your challenge. Thanks for your leadership. We have a gift. We want a piece of Notre Dame. These are cufflinks made out of the seats, the wooden seats from the stadium. And this is a piece of Notre Dame. Come back and visit us again. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Is that true? That's true. Thank you.